Before sunrise on August 23, 1722, the Kangxi Emperor died at his imperial retreat near Beijing, and within hours the empire began to move. Officials sealed the palace gates, messengers were dispatched across the empire, and mourning rituals were set into motion with practiced precision. Nothing about the response was uncertain, because the death of an emperor was an event the system had long prepared for. Inside the Forbidden City, the atmosphere was different. Dozens of imperial consorts remained within the inner court, fully aware that the man who had defined their status, security, and future no longer existed. Some of these women had borne sons, some held recognized rank within the palace hierarchy, many had neither. Yet all of them had lived within a structure that controlled their movement, their income, and their place in the world. With the emperor gone, the central question was no longer about loyalty or service. It became immediate and unavoidable. Who would take the throne, and what would happen to the women whose lives had been built around the previous ruler? This moment carried real consequences. A small number of women would rise to positions of influence. Most would disappear into controlled seclusion. In earlier periods, some would not survive at all. Official records document the death of emperors with clarity, yet they often leave the fate of these women in the background. This is royal history with Ruth. What followed the emperor's death was not the collapse of a system, but its continuation. The structure did not break, it adjusted, and in doing so, it determined the lives of every woman inside it. A system designed for the aftermath. What happened next was not decided in the moment. It followed a structure that had been refined over centuries. By the Qing dynasty, the inner court operated within a clearly defined hierarchy. At the top stood the empress, followed by ranked consorts, whose titles dictated their privileges, responsibilities, and access to the emperor. Clothing, stipends, ceremonial duties, and even daily routines were regulated in detail. Most women had entered the palace through formal selection processes, often from elite banner families, and once inside, their lives became tightly controlled. They could not leave, their movements were restricted, their futures depended on factors they could not easily change. When the emperor died, three elements determined what happened next: a woman's rank, whether she had borne a son, and her position within palace alliances. These were not abstract categories. They were the difference between influence and isolation, earlier traditions, and the shadow of death. The controlled system seen under the Qing was not the starting point. Earlier periods reveal a harsher reality. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Anyang shows that early rulers were buried alongside human remains, placed deliberately within royal tombs. Some of these individuals were likely servants or attendants, though the exact identities are not always clear. What is clear is the pattern. In early belief systems, death did not always end service to the ruler. Over time, these practices began to change. By the Han Dynasty, large-scale burial of living attendants had largely disappeared from imperial practice and was replaced by symbolic objects. This shift did not mean safety in a modern sense. It meant that risk moved away from ritual and into politics, when survival became political. By the Han period, the greatest danger to a concubine was no longer burial. It was influence. A concubine who bore a son could rise in status, and if that son became emperor, she could become Empress Dowager. This was not a ceremonial title. It carried real authority, particularly when the new emperor was young. One early example shaped how later courts responded. After the death of Emperor Gaozu of Han, Empress Lu held power for years. influencing the direction of the state. Her dominance left a lasting impression on later rulers, who became increasingly cautious about allowing imperial mothers to accumulate unchecked authority. As a result, when emperors died leaving young heirs, the mothers of those heirs were sometimes removed or controlled. These decisions were not about morality or personal conflict. They were political calculations designed to prevent instability. Removal as a strategy. Not all dynasties relied on elimination. Some developed alternative methods to manage risk. During the Tang dynasty, many former concubines were sent into religious life after the emperor's death. This approach removed them from court politics while maintaining an appearance of order and restraint. One well-documented case reveals how uncertain this outcome could be. After the death of Emperor Taizong of Tang, a concubine named Wu Zetian was sent to a temple. At that point, her removal seemed final, yet she later returned to court, rose through the ranks, and eventually became emperor herself. Her case was exceptional. Most women sent away did not return. For them, removal from court marked the end of any political role. Containment inside the palace. By the Song dynasty, the system moved towards containment rather than removal. Imperial widows remained within the palace, where they continued to take part in rituals and maintain formal roles linked to ancestor worship. Their daily lives became structured and predictable. They could not remarry. Their movement remained restricted. Their status no longer shifted. This approach reduced visible conflict, but it also removed personal choice. Stability was achieved through limitation, a return to harsh measures. This pattern did not progress in a straight line. It could reverse. During the early Ming dynasty, the reign of the Hongwu emperor introduced a harsher approach. Some records suggest that concubines without sons were required to die following the emperor's death. The exact scale of these actions is uncertain. Sources vary, and historians treat the numbers with caution. What can be confirmed is that the policy existed in some form and reflects how quickly the system could change under a single ruler. Later Ming periods show fewer signs of this practice, with many concubines continuing to live within the palace. Order under the Qing. By the Qing dynasty, the system had stabilized into a more controlled form. Concubines were not routinely executed after an emperor's death. Archival records indicate that most lived on, often for decades, within the palace system. Their treatment depended largely on whether they had born sons. Those who had sons could rise in status, particularly if their child became emperor. In such cases, they might become empress dowagers and gain influence within the court. Those without sons remained within the palace. They were assigned residences, provided with stipends, and continued to participate in rituals. Their roles no longer changed, but they were not discarded. The system did not remove them, it contained them. When power continued. In some cases, the death of an emperor did not reduce a concubine's influence, it created an opportunity. In 1861, the Xianfeng emperor died, leaving a young heir. His mother, Empress Dowager Cixi, rose rapidly in status. Court records confirm her involvement in removing rival regents and consolidating power. Over time, she became one of the most influential figures in Qing political history, shaping decisions for decades. Her rise was not typical, but it demonstrates how the system could allow power to continue through different channels. Life for the majority. For most concubines, life after the emperor's death followed a quieter path. Accounts from the late Qing period describe structured daily routines within assigned residences. Movement remained restricted. Contact with the outside world was limited. Their time was occupied with reading, sewing, religious practice, and participation in court rituals. Their status no longer rose or fell, it remained fixed. They had not entered the palace by choice in the modern sense, and they could not leave it after the emperor's death. The system reorganized them, but it did not release them. The fate of concubines after an emperor's death did not follow a single pattern. It changed across dynasties, shaped by belief systems, political concerns, and the priorities of individual rulers. Early periods included burial practices that tied servants to rulers in death. Later dynasties shifted towards political control, removal, or containment. By the Qing period, most concubines survived, but they remained within a system that continued to define their lives. A small number rose to positions of power. Most lived in controlled seclusion. What remained constant was the purpose behind these decisions. When the emperor died, the system acted to preserve stability and protect the dynasty. Individual outcomes were shaped by that priority, not by personal freedom. Do you think the later dynasties genuinely reduced harm, or did they simply create more controlled ways to manage power? And which dynasty, based on the evidence, most clearly reflects the true priorities of imperial rule? But what did their lives actually look like before this moment? Watch the next video on screen, because it reveals the system they were living under long before everything changed.